we can start again from the same scene.blend file that we started before. And in this setup scene, in principle, it really doesn't matter. All of these tricks that I will be showing are completely transferable regardless of how your scene is set up. But before we start manipulating meshes, I will select everything in the scene. Well, first I will switch on the tool that helps show the display, to display my keystrokes and clicks. So to select everything in the scene, I will press A, and I will hide it. So I will not delete it, I will just make it so it's invisible. To do this, I will press H. So now we have a nice empty space that we can work in. Cool, okay, so to create another object, we can go press Shift A here, and choose a selection of different basic shapes. We can go for a cube. We can make a circle, which is a one-dimensional thing. We can add different basic shapes, like a torus, like a donut. But my idea was to try to make something which could be actually useful for a chemical, let's say, table of contents figure. And I think probably Selena would recognize exactly what I'm doing. So let's try to make a round bottom flask with the liquid inside, with the correct material so that it looks like it's glass and liquid. So to do this, we can select something which looks the most like a round bottom flask, and let's use a UV sphere. So now we created a UV sphere. As you can see, it looks a little bit like a disco ball. So, but we want it to be smooth. So in order to change it to smooth, that it looks smooth, we can change the shading. So far we are using this shade flat, but we can go to shade smooth, and now it looks like a surface. Okay, now we will change the edit mode. So here you can see everything that we were doing so far was in object mode, but Blender allows you to go into this edit mode, within which you can change the geometry of objects. So for example, you see all of these points here. These points are called vertices, and all of the commands to rotate, move, scale apply to edges, vertices, and faces as well. So for example, edge is just a point. You see this thing that I have selected, that is an edge. You can change the selection method to get to go to, or for example, so if this is an edge, this would be a vertex. Sorry, this is a vertex, this is an edge, and this is a face. So let's try to manipulate just vertices in order to create something that looks like a round bottom flask. So I used the one to go to the perfect front view, and I will change the shading, the viewport shading here, not to solid, not to rendered like we had before, but let's go to this here, this mesh view, which allows us to see through the mesh. So we can select what we want to select with more precision. So for example, if you want to make a round bottom flask, let's do the following. So let's first remove the vertices that we don't need. So we select this top here. Or let's do it like this. Let's select this, and let's press X to delete vertices. So now we have a sphere with a hole. So we want to extrude this this edge loop. This is called the edge loop now because it's it is consisted out of edges, and it is a loop. So very original. So we can now take this edge loop, press E, and press. So that means extrude, and we can press Z. So we go directly vertically up. So let's say this is good. In order to change the shading, we can also press Z on the keyboard and change from wireframe to solid. So now we can take a better look how this thing looks like. You can switch between edit mode and object mode by pressing tab. Okay, so now we have this thing, which is obviously not glass. It looks a little bit weird, and it's completely thin because it just has one layer of faces. So in order to adjust this, we can, well, first thing we can do is to use one modifier. So within these tabs here, you have this wrench. If you click on that, you have the option to add a modifier. If you click on add modifier, you get a whole selection of things that you can use. Today we will be using just two things. And the first one is called subdivision surface. So if you click on this, the Blender will try to take into account where are the edges, where are the vertices, how the faces are aligned, and try to interpolate geometry between those edges. So basically, Blender has to calculate, to keep in memory the positions of all of the geometry of one object. So if you want to make something with a lot of detail, you need a lot of geometry, which requires a lot of memory. In order not to have to keep all of this stuff in memory, you can use algorithms which interpolate between the existing points. So what this modifier does is exactly that. It tries to interpolate between the existing geometry and this interpolated geometry. So, but this now kind of broke the aesthetic of a round bottom flask. Let's change the shading to wireframe. So, as I mentioned before, if you want to, so this modifier interpolates between geometry. So if we want something to be closer to our intended shape, we just need to add geometry to those places where it's not looking correct. So we should add some geometry in this part here. In order to do that, we can use a shortcut, which is in edit mode, of course. We need to use a shortcut which adds a loop cut. To do this, we press Ctrl-R, and we get this yellow line here. And if we click on that, we get a new edge loop. And now if we move this edge loop, you can see that this skin of the material is moving as well as the selected area. So if you move this edge loop very close to the bottom, you will see that the geometry resembles more what we intended before. Let's repeat this process, let's say here. So now, using this method, we can clean up all of the things that we don't like. So I will just add some geometry all around this shape. And let's call that good. So I'm back in object mode. So nice, but so now the flask looks nice. We can have it in very high quality because we can subdivide the surface as much as we want. The next thing that we want to address is the fact that we have completely thin edges. So we have no thickness to the edges. To add some thickness to the edges, we can use another modifier. This modifier is called solidify. And what solidify does is add thickness to the edges. So very convenient. So we can basically just choose how thick we want our round bottom flask. Nice, cool. Okay, I will call this close enough. The material is still not correct, but we will address this later. Okay, let's move this round bottom flask to the side. And let's say I press grep G, X free. So I moved it by free to in the X-axis. So now we need to make some liquid. To do this, I'll go Shift A to add another sphere. So the liquid needs to be inside of the container, so it needs to be a little bit smaller than the previous icosphere that we use. So I'll just say S scale and say 0.98, for example. And now let's center the view on this sphere, and let's do a process very similar that we did before. So let's first shade it smooth, and let's go now to edit mode, and let's remove everything that we don't need. So it's been a while since I've been to since I spent some time in a lab, but I believe that you're not supposed to fill up a round bottom flask more than 1/3. So I believe this is more or less 1/3 of the round bottom flask. And as you can see, now we have like a good starting point for the liquid inside of the flask. The only thing we need to do now is, you see, now it doesn't have a top, so we need to create a top on this thing. The way to do this is by pressing F. So I selected all of the top edges, pressed F, and that creates one face with all of the among all of the selected edges. The problem with this is that it's very poor in geometry. So we need to add more geometry to this thing. The same way that we did with Control R. Here we can do another trick, which is even simpler. We just press I, which means inset, and then we can inset a bit of more geometry. So let's say it something like this. I don't know how many times I did it, but it's not important. And now I would like to collapse all of these vertices to one point. To do this, we can just scale all of them to 0. So I'll press S and press 0. And now they're in one point. But the problem is that now we have, I think, 32 vertices in one point. We want to get rid of those vertices. So what we can do is, well, basically select all by pressing A, and then go to, I think it's Mesh, Clean Up, and Merge by Distance. And now we have this info thing that popped up, which said remove 31 vertex. That means we are left with just one here. So now the geometry of the liquid should be fine. Now let's make it look nicer by adding a modifier like we did before. So subdivision surface, and let's say something like this. So now this looks like something that can, like the contents of this beaker here. Okay, so now let's move the beaker back to where it was. So let's grab X -3. Now both objects are completely aligned. The problem is that we cannot see them. Okay, so now we are done with the hard surface modeling. Now everything looks more or less like it should. Now we need to play with the materials. To play with the materials, we need to go back to look at the camera. We need the lights. We need all of the other things that we hid in the beginning. To unhide things, you just press H, but while holding Alt. So Alt plus H. And now we unhid our lights, unhid everything else. Okay. We're back. We're back here. So let's just call the first sphere is the beaker, and the second sphere is beaker content. So now let's try to adjust the materials to make it look like the thing that we want to model actually. Let's just scale it up a little bit. So I selected the, I selected the beaker and beaker content, and I will just press S and drag the mouse to make it a little bit larger. Something like that. Okay, so now we can start playing with the materials. Again, I will increase the size of this place here. And now the beaker is selected, but it doesn't have a material. So I will click New, and let's say Let's call this material glass. And let's change the shading of the viewport from solid to rendered. Okay, so now this is this basic material. So how to change the material of this thing to look like glass? First thing that you need to do is to make it transparent or transmittent. So we take the slider here, which is called transmission, and put it to the maximum. So now we have a transmission surface. Another thing that the glass, another property of glass is that it's typically very smooth. So let's put this to 0.05. Let's change the roughness. Let's decrease the roughness. And you can see that already the beaker looks quite glass-like. You can see the reflections of the light. You can see the reflections of the side lights and the general light. We can take a look what happens with these reflections when we change the roughness, just as a curiosity. So we were at 0.05, go to 0.5. It's much rougher, right? Now this is a matter of taste. You can choose what you like. Let's say 0.2. This should be fine. Okay, so you can also change the index of refraction of the material that you have. I put it, the default is 1.45. I think that is very close to actual glass, so I typically don't touch this thing. So let's change the beaker content. Liquids, let's say it's a transparent liquid, it's not a suspension. Let's make a new material, which is called solvent. And let's repeat the same situation as we did before. So we put the transmission as high as it will go, decrease the roughness as low as it will go. So the metallic is at 0, everything is 0, but let's change the base color to something else. Let's put it to, I don't know. Let's make permanganate. Why not? Should be around here. Let's call that close enough. Okay, cool, nice. So in principle, now all of the materials should be correct. The light is physical, everything is fine. So let's try to render and see what happens. So this will take a bit longer because the materials are more complicated and the materials have volume. So it will take a little bit more time than a normal render. Again, you will see here, you have a little bit of these points here, which are basically noise. They come from the roughness and from the light scattering on the surface of the glass. If you want to smooth out these points, you will need to render with more samples, as I mentioned before. So let's call that fine, and let's say let's save this as an image. So let's call the image beaker gray. Say this image. Okay. So now let's take a look how this beaker looks with the white background. You can see it looks very, very dark. The reason for this is that in order to correctly set up the light of the scene, Blender has to have a setting which is called environment or world color. To change the world color, so we obviously have something which is gray going into black, right? That is why the glass, which is translucent, so it lets through light, but you can see through the glass, you can see the color of the world. To adjust the world color, you need to go into this tab, which is a little globe symbolizing world. If you click on that, you have a world color here. And if you put it to white, you'll get something which looks kind of weird in this case. But let's try to render this and compare it with the previous render. So you can see that we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boxes which are moving around. That is because on my laptop I'm using my CPU, which has 4 cores, which are multi-threaded. So that is 8 effective cores which are doing the rendering. If you have a GPU in your computer, then it should work much faster. So let's save the image. So let's save as beaker, just beaker. And let's see how this thing looks now on a white background. Much more realistic, right? Okay, cool. So now you can basically manipulate these two things, rotate however you like to make it fit your graphical abstract or whatever you like. So if you want to have liquid, oops, we forgot about gravity. So if you want to have liquid going out, you can do something like this, or in principle, you can with the relatively small set of commands that I showed you before, you can be very creative in the way that you arrange your scene with this. Okay, I will just reset the position of these things. Then I will move them a little bit up. So beaker content and this thing, graph set. Let's keep it here. And let's try to model another thing which is relatively common for people who are doing well, chemistry at our institute in Tarragona. And that would be electrochemistry. For example, you would want to represent a EMS source. So if you want to do that, let's try to model a battery, which would also be quite fast. Let's do the exact same thing as we did before, namely select all by pressing A and press H to hide. So if you want to model a battery, does somebody have a suggestion for a good starting shape? A cylinder should work fine, right? So if you have a cylinder, let's try to make it look more like a battery. A very convenient way of moving around in the scene is by, when you select something and press comma on the numpad, your viewport locks to that thing. So you see now that is in the center, and I can rotate around this thing. Okay, so to model a battery, let's jump into edit mode by pressing tab again. And okay, let's make it a little bit taller. I will press S to scale, Z to scale it with Z, and increase and make it a little bit taller. And now let's repeat the same thing that we did before with the beaker, and that is adding geometry. So let's say I press Control R, then I get this yellow thing here. If before touching anything, if I just scroll up, I can increase the number of faces. So this is additional 6 loop cuts, which we can add by clicking and then clicking again. So now we increase the geometry of our cylinder. We just need to work a little bit on the top side. So for example, I can show you, for example, I'm working on this part of the mesh. I have this thing selected here. If I want to move very quickly to the top, I can just click on something here and press comma on the numpad. And it should lock to that point, which doesn't work now. I don't know why. Yes, here, you see. Okay, so let's add some geometry to the face like we did before. I will press I to inset, another I to inset again, another I to inset again. Let's add another one very close to this one, and then let's maybe extrude by Z. Take a look, scale. Insert again, insert again, insert again. and then scale to 0, and then repeat the thing which is mesh, cleanup, and merge by distance, and then we have 31 remove vertices again. So now we have this thing, which will later be the outside of the battery, so the branded part, let's say. So I took a look at some pictures of batteries before. So I'm trying to make something relatively similar to for example, this one here. So what you can notice, you have this the colored part of the battery goes around the edges, and then you have this metal part here, and it has this extrusion here. So let's try to mimic that. So this part this part of the model would be the external part of the battery, the colored part. But we need to add a little bit to the bottom. Let's do the same thing. Maybe you noticed that when looking at the perfect view, pressing on pad 7 gives us a top view. If you want to reverse, so 180 degrees from that view, you can press 9. So if I want the bottom view, I would go 7 to the top view and then 9 to the bottom view. It works for everything, for every position of the camera. So let's just do the same thing again. Let's just do the same thing again. Oops. Let's say again here, and then just move it a little bit up, and insert again, insert again, insert again, and scale to 0, and that should be fine. Okay, let's take a look at what we made now. So now we have this thing which looks like the outside of the battery, right? Let's add some modifiers to that. Let's shade it smooth, and shade it smooth, and let's add a subdivision surface again. So this looks more or less reasonable to what we would like to see. Maybe we can try to, you can see that this edge is a little bit soft. Let's try to sharpen it up a little bit by using the stuff that we learned before. So we need to go into edit mode with the battery selected. And we can add a loop cut here by pressing Ctrl R, and then see, okay, let's go here. Let's try to sharpen this one up, and then we can slide this thing. So let's see, like this. So let's call that a good exterior of the battery. So let's make the interior also very fast. We can almost repeat the same process. Grab X by 3. Let's add another cylinder. Scale it by Z to be somewhere here. And scale it by, if you want to scale it with all of the axes except one, then you press Shift and that axis. So if I want to scale it in every direction other than Z, then I press Shift Z, and then you can scale. So this will be the size of the core of the battery. So it needs to be a little bit larger. Let's say something like this. And now let's repeat the process as we did before. So increase the geometry a bit. Should be fine. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's do a couple of insets here. Here, here, here. Extrude set. So inset. And insert another one. And scale to 0. Fine. And let's repeat the thing for the bottom. Inset, inset again. Well, let's take a better look. Inset again, and another one, and then scale to 0. Fine, and then let's select all, and let's remove the excessive faces. Should be mesh, cleanup, merge by distance. Cool, nice. Okay, so now let's add the subdivision surface modifier. And let's see if we need to add some geometry somewhere. We see we do need to add something. So Control I to add a loop cut. Let's put one here. Let's put one here. Let's put the one here. And this should probably be good. So now let's overlap these two things and see where we are. So let's grab this outside of the battery by x -3, put it here. And now we see that we need to reduce the size a little bit of the outside. So let's scale it by z, something like this. So now this looks very, very similar to actual. It looks very similar to what a battery should look like. Okay, so now we can just set up the materials, render, and we should be done. So let's unhide everything. So Alt-H. Look from the viewport. Okay, we see already that the battery is not in the correct position. So I selected the cylinder in cylinder 1. Let's call it out and battery in. So selected battery in, battery out, move it with set G, set, rotated by Y, 90 degrees, for example, and then rotate by Z by, I don't know, -30. Whoops. So rotate Z -30. And then let's move to the rendered view. Looks quite nice. Okay, the inside should be metallic, right? So we add a new material to with the selected inside. We put the metallic to 1. And we can put the color to something dark, something like this. And we can put the new material to the battery outside. Out, and let's put it to some dielectric color because it's a sticker. Let's use this blue, why not? And now, for example, if we want to have like a lacquered look on the top, we can use this clear coat slider, which adds some reflections to the top, but keeps it dielectric. So now another thing that I wanted to mention is that if you have multiple objects in the scene, they actually interact. So if you look at the beaker here, you can see that you can see the reflection of the battery moving around as the battery moves around. So I will just reset it here and render the whole thing. Which will take a little bit more time than previously because we have more things in the scene. So there are more reflections to calculate. And once we have this rendered, we can just save it. Of course, the size of these two objects you can adjust by selecting and pressing S to scale and then moving the cursor. So now we can just go image, save as. I don't know what is this. This is a battery plus. Save as image, and then you can drop it into your, well, the composing program that you're using, and they look very nice together. And in principle, that should cover most of the things that you could use on a day-to-day basis. So with this, the tricks that are inside of this video, these are the maybe 99.9% of the things that you use while doing talks and doing covers and things like this. So it is always some combination of these basic operations.